Well, thank you for the introduction, and it's great to be here. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yes.
Excellent. Okay, that's good. Um, ah, so I guess I first want to thank um, uh, the Tonto um, and Abbott Jane and also Spencer for agreeing um, uh, to present this opportunity. I really appreciate it very much. It's great to be here in this sort of virtual way, right? I I I wanted to sit closer to um, the iPad, but when I pulled the iPad back on the tatami I'm sitting on, there's this giant cabinet in the way, and it blocks the Wi-Fi a bit, and I can't. So I feel like you're looking at me down a really long tunnel or something like that. So I'll try to be animated or something in order to communicate. So, and I guess the other thing I want to do is I want to apologize. I've given a Dharma talk, at least one Dharma talk a week for the last almost 20 years, right? And in the course of 20 years, I've discovered that I only actually have one thing to say about Zen. And I my theory is that all Zen teachers run into this problem eventually, and that's why the Zen school has invented this complex um, conceptual framework that's full of lists and uh, spiritual qualities and all the rest of that sort of thing, so that they have something to talk about where they can express the one thing that they can say in different ways, so nobody gets sick of hearing it, right? But this is a golden opportunity that none of you have heard me talk, but well, actually, that's not true. Chris has heard me talk before, but nobody else has heard me talk before. So I can just say the one thing, and then maybe it'll be okay, right? So I hope I can do it justice, and I apologize if if when you're sitting out there listening, you think I've heard all this before. So anyway, because it is just the one thing, right? So I guess to start at the very beginning, ground level, what's the problem? What are we trying to um, address in the context of Zen practice? Does anybody want to volunteer a statement or brief summary of what the problem is? Anyone who wants to, just go for it.
Well, just traditionally in Buddhism, the problem is suffering.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I think that's right. So the 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 Buddha stated that so the Buddha also had this opportunity to say the one thing, the first time anyone has ever said the one thing, um, in his original turning of the wheel of Dharma, to about what, five or six people or something like that, who were all his companions, former companions in the aesthetic practices business. And so he had this opportunity to say the one thing, and he said it. It's suffering, right? So then the next question is, what is suffering? I'm asking.
It's like the opposite of ease.
That's good. That's really good. Anyone else?
Dissatisfaction.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, my sense is that suffering uh, is the sort of translation, the received translation that everybody's decided to use. But yes, people say also dissatisfaction. Um, uh, I guess the other question there so what the Buddha supposedly said is, life is suffering. So I guess the other term to get square with is life. What exactly is life, right? Um, and I'd be happy to take a response to that question too, if anybody wants to volunteer it. What do you think? What's life? Okay, so here's my take on that. Life is essentially a process whereby a node in the vast network or tree or tangle of causation of matter, energy, and causation, right? Um, has a mechanism of memory that allows past remembered stuff to be brought to bear um, on the present moment, and in the process of responding to the present moment, such that the existence of that node continues for as long as possible, right? And there are some living beings that use that mechanism and live literally forever, like glass sponges, right? Like they're essentially immortal, right? You can kill them, but left to their own devices, they're immortal, right? And that viruses do this, amoebas do this, blue whales do this, elephants do this. It's life, right? It's essentially memory, a memory-driven process, right? And and if you look at it that way, you can sort of see why life might be suffering, right? Or life might at least contain a lot of suffering, right? Um, Memory is great, right? But each of us takes this path through life, which is very narrow, and the experiences afforded are highly limited, right? And how could that possibly prepare anything like that? Possibly prepare us um, for the unbelievable variety of experience that awaits us in every moment. The world is always throwing up something new, and I mean, everyone knows this, right? Um, as life goes on, it throws really remarkable things in your way, some of which are extremely hard to deal with based on your memories of how things have gone before. Like, let's try a so a few years ago I was driving up the 128 on the way to Lake Berryessa to go bike riding, and at the very last moment, a car coming the other way, we were both going about 55 miles an hour, car coming the other way swerved straight into my lane and hit me head on, right? Because I think the woman that was driving it was texting or something like that, right? Um, you know, how can you possibly use your memory to deal with that? But it's a it, you know it's a place where the usual approaches kind of fail, right? So as a I guess the one other thing I want to say about life is suffering, right, is that um, I think that what's very difficult to talk about the history of Buddhist ideas, because the history of Buddhist ideas is incredibly murky. There are no documents available before 500-ish years after the Buddha lived, and all of the sort of canonical documents were assembled um, or sort of codified more like 1,000 years after the Buddha lived, right? But one of the things that it seems like it's true is that early on, in Buddhism, mostly what they were talking about was human suffering, right? And the mechanisms of human suffering, right? I think in the course of the development of Mahayana, the picture was broadened, and we're really talking about the suffering of all sentient beings. So who does that include? Well, certainly blue whales and elephants. Maybe not amoebas, right? But nobody really knows for sure, right? But in any case, a wide variety of beings, of sentient beings, suffer, right? Um, for at least the reason that I just said, which is that their survival and response generation mechanisms that involve pattern recognition and making and performing patterned responses to remembered to remembered patterns they that are kicked off by their perception of the present moment is not up to the task of responding skillfully to every single thing, right? And so bad things happen and they hurt, right? I have a cat sitting over here who is recovering from a horrible cyst that who knows how it happened. I think maybe another cat bit him on the chin or something like that. But he's suffering right now, actually. He's wearing a cone of shame, and and he's not eating or drinking because he's still recovering from this pretty extreme surgery. Suffering, right? If only he had recognized that this might happen based on his memory, maybe he would have avoided it. But who knows, right? So that said, humans are the world champion sufferers, right? There's absolutely no question about it. We cause each other, we cause ourselves suffering, we cause each other suffering, and we cause suffering to a wide array of sentient beings that cross our path for one reason or another, right? And so it's probably worth talking about why that is, right? And the reason, I think, is that every animal has been given great gifts by genetic evolution and maybe to a certain extent cultural evolution, depending on how much of a culture they have, right? Like, cheetahs can run 80 miles an hour. Go cheetahs, right? And blue whales can hold their breath for an incredibly long time. Go whales, right? What humans got from a combination of genetic and cultural evolution is we got this very, very sophisticated language, right? And we have an unusually powerful capacity for long range planning. And the last part is we have this hypertrophied, multi-layered sociality, right? And that's the primary reason the sociality is the primary reason why we've been so successful at taking over and partially ruining the planet, right? Is that we're the mix of cooperation and competition in our relationships is very sophisticated, and we're capable of framing ourselves in a social relationship with almost arbitrarily large groups of other people. So you can have nation states where everybody somehow agrees, right? Amazing. That's that's huge, right? And in any case, so with those three things, our language, our sociality, and our capacity for long range planning, they're great gifts, right? But they also require a number of problematic things, right? One is that we have an additional cognitive faculty that addresses models and response to the world mostly in language ready tokens and concepts, right? And then the other thing that it does is it requires that we live we we live as a self model, right? That's constructed in terms of this cognitive faculty, right? So we are carrying around this model of the self and a model of the world, and we narrate for ourselves the course of our self model through the world. That's how we mostly work, right? And you can see how that could be a cause of an additional cause of suffering on top of the one that I was talking about earlier, where our capacity to meet the world is limited, right? Because again, language is limited. It's great, but when you say fish, right? You have this idea that you understand a fish, but actually fishes are more complicated than we can ever conceive, right? As are cats and even viruses, right? The the and the divisions we make, the stories we tell ourselves, and all the rest of that sort of thing are and the preferences um, and kind of the graspings and aversions that arise out of those preferences and are the original reason in Buddha's talk why he said life is suffering are they're both the result of our success, and they're also the cause of our suffering, right? And the cause of the suffering that we, lavishly spread around the world. Right? So here we are. We're saddled with this problem that's directly interlinked with, entangled with, built on the things that make us human and the things that make us alive, right? That's a big deal, right? And pretty much all the great religions of the world have our efforts to identify and solve this problem, right? The problem of being human, the human condition, right? Buddhism decided that, well, in this original talk, the Buddha said, "Here's, we can be free of this. Here's a proposition. We can practice a particular way of being in the world that that will offer freedom from the human condition." He doesn't explain ever what he means by freedom from the human condition, but he says that's a possibility, right? And by the time, say, of Dogen, right, that a lot of things happened in between there, but by the time of Dogen, that way of being in the world was kind of encapsulated in a this array of monastic formal practice and a way of living together in a formal way and practicing together in a formal way, the centerpiece of which was zazen, right? And so I'm going to ask you all one last question. What is zazen? Any takers?
Being what is?
Hmm? That's
Be,
excellent. That's excellent. Yes, that's right. Um, Anyone else?
A magnifying glass.
Yeah, that's really good, actually. Yeah, it throws light on and maybe some additional focus on something about the process of being a live human, right? Yeah, absolutely. When when I was in a shosan, I was attending a shosan ceremony with my teacher Paul Haller um, at one point, and somebody got up and asked, "What's zazen?" And Paul said, which is true, but it's not. It's not the answer that we're going to discuss. The two answers you guys gave were better. Um, so the simplest way of talking about zazen is as a devotional practice in which you imitate the guy on the altar, right? By taking a pose, right, and or a posture, and that's largely correct, right? You you don't have to sit full lotus like the guy on the altar. It turns out that various people have the capacity to do various things, but the the main point is you take that posture in a way that's, first of all, you take it for a ridiculous long time. Like, nobody is comfortable with taking a single posture and holding it for, an hour and 15 minutes, whatever. You think it's not what we're designed to do. What we're designed to do is move through life by taking various postures in ways that we're somehow familiar with, but we don't really understand how we do it, right? Like, if I said, well, why don't you I don't know, uh, you know, get in downward dog, and then explain downward dog to me completely, and how to get into it and how to get out of it and all the rest of the thing. It's very murky how we do these things. We just do it, right? It's amazing. But in any case, we're supposed to take this posture, something we know how to do but don't really understand, and we're supposed to hold it for an amount of time that nobody is particularly good at. And there's some difficulties. Often you put pressure on joints or hold muscles in a particular position after a while get painful, and you can even cause yourself nerve impingements that are damaging to your nerves, right? It's a big deal to do this, right? And so the question is, what's the good part about taking this posture and doing it with this sort of broad attention, focused intention, and a kind of moment to moment self-reminding that you could sum up by saying the point of zazen is always be sitting, right? You're always forming this posture. You're always attending to the layout of the body. You're always attending to the breath, and so on and so forth. Again, it's hard. Everybody in this room knows that it's hard, right? So why do you do it? The answer is sort of like the magnifying glass response, right? It turns out that Dogen and everyone else recognized that this kind of engagement with the body, and that's the crucial part, is that it's engagement with the body, is the gateway to a kind of to we were talking earlier about our sort of conventional cognitive faculty. That's one of the main modes of engagement with the world that we use, and we carry it around. And a lot of people think of it as as the only way we are, right? But in fact, we have this other mode of being that's completely not entangled with language, right? And with everyday cognition, right? Like Suzuki Roshi called it big mind, but you could call it Buddha mind, right? This mode that the baseline of which is this kind of unconditioned appreciation for just being alive, right? And that sort of surrounds and supports and is in constant conversation with our cognitive faculty, right? And one of the things that rises to the surface when you sit in this way, when you connect with your full-on embodied experience, is this other mode of being, right? Big mind, right? And once that happens, there's a poem called "The Five Ranks," which is supposedly by Dongshan, where he says the first time that this happens, probably you don't have a clue about what's going on. And then he says, but after a while, you realize that it's always there, and it sneaks up on you. He says you turn the corner and you're facing a mirror, right? Yeah, this mode starts presenting itself as part of your life, and the model for living proposed by Zen and by Zazen is to make Buddha mind an everyday part of your everyday life, and allow it to both illuminate and also counterbalance our habitual human activity in a way that's beneficial and transformative, right? So that's why we do it. And that was a long-winded explanation. Does anybody have any questions about that, or comments, or anything else? What do you think? Go ahead.
So I guess for me, when you mentioned that sitting zazen is like a body thing, for me it's always so much of like a mind thing.
Mm-hmm.
So it's interesting for you to put it in terms of the body.
Yes. Well, it's great that you bring that up. I mean, when we sit, one of the things that happens is that the mind takes off and starts doing its thing, right? In particular, our conventional cognitive faculty takes off and starts doing its thing. But my experience with that, in any case, is that what you notice, if you really pay attention and keep coming back to attending to the body, is that you and everyone has a kind of cycle of attention, right? And I think there's a perfectly good evolutionary reason for this, right? Like, let's say we had no cycle of attention. So we would start thinking, let's imagine a primitive human sitting on a open plain somewhere. We don't even have to speculate about where, and they're sitting there and they drop into thinking, right? And they're so totally absorbed in thinking that one of the things that you notice about the conventional cognitive faculty, and this is kind of what you're saying, right? Is that when we're really bound up in thought, the scope of our experience shifts and it becomes kind of tightly contracted. I always feel it like there's a black hole, a gravity well around conventional cognition, and it just pulls in everything and doesn't allow our attention to wander beyond it, right? Let's say that was continuously true of all humans. Someone would be sitting there thinking, like, wow, if I chip this piece of rock with another piece of rock, maybe I can, sharpen its edges and make it a useful tool, right? And while they're in the middle of this, a bear, just ambles across the plain and bonks them on the head, and that's the end of that, right? So my sense is that we have this cycle of attention where if you sit down and you take your posture and you sort of allow your attention to, fill the body, kind of note the posture, maybe make some adjustments and so on. And then sometime between, 5 and 15 seconds later, a thought has come up that's sufficiently compelling that we decide to take it on, and our attention shifts to that cognitive event, right? What's true is, in my experience, is that sometime later, and again, where the time frames we're talking about here are very short, right? Tens of seconds. Sometime later, your body will kind of go, hey, maybe you should be paying attention briefly, right? And it kind of sends you a little ping, right? And our default response to being pinged when we're in conventional cognitive mode is to ignore it, right? But the thing that you can do in the context of sitting practice is you can essentially teach yourself to hear those pings and to respond to them by allowing your attention to expand and take in the body and allowing your attention. The point is that your cycle of attention is a natural thing, and that you can learn to sort of surf it by sitting zazen, and that activity of surfing your cycle of attention can be carried into your everyday life in a way that you bring along this sort of broader awareness of the body, and when something happens, it can be a trigger, particularly if it's a difficult thing. It can be a trigger to sort of expand the awareness and take in the body as a whole, and that's the gateway to Buddha mind, basically. So does that help, or do you notice that? Does that agree with your experience, or what do you think?
I'm sorry, it's the gateway to what?
It's the gateway to Buddha mind. The contact with the body is the gateway to Buddha mind, basically. So, anyone else?
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Oh, go ahead.
I have a question.
Of course.
So I've heard a lot of discussion about these different phenomena that you experience with practice with Zazen. And now you've described something which is the I guess an increased facility with the practice of attention, which naturally it makes sense, that is something that develops. But at the same time, we're told to practice without intention, without gaining ideas. And I guess I struggle to sort of hold this sort of paradox in my mind, and I suppose that the part of the problem is that it's not supposed to be something that you hold in your mind. But I wonder if you could talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, it's an excellent question, right? Um, and and we are not the first people to be holding this question. If you look at the Buddhist literature in general, right, and particularly the Zen literature, this question is written all over the literature. And furthermore, um, that if you read like say you read the koan literature, right? Um, the whole function of that literature is to hold up these examples of of awakened behavior and so on in front of everyone, and like the commentaries literally say things like, don't you want to be just like Zhao? Just look at him, he's awesome, right? so so how could you not um, uh, get a couple of gaining ideas there, right? Um, it it's not exactly a paradox, but it smells like a paradox, right? And here's why it's not exactly a paradox. Um, the human mind is capable of being transfixed with ambition at time t, and at time t plus 5 seconds, having absolutely no ambition whatsoever, right? Because it's not it's not like, okay, this is really stupid, but there's the V'ger episode of Star Trek in which V'ger is dedicated to perfection, right? And can't stand imperfection. And Captain Kirk tricks V'ger into making a mistake, and then says, "See, you made a mistake." And V'ger decides that it needs to explode itself, and so they have to like transport it out of the ship to about a light year away, and then it makes this incredible explosion, right? We're not like that. Okay, we're capable of holding contradictions and holding um, different modes of engagement with the world simultaneously in our body and mind, right? And so it's true that it makes it really easy to overdo, say, zazen, right? So here's an example. So somebody once taught me these breathing techniques that I still use in zazen that have to do with essentially their pranayama techniques that I think pretty much all Zen teachers use, but certainly Zen teachers in the in the Rinzai school use, right? And I really appreciated these techniques, and I was getting a lot out of them. But I one sesshin I was clearly overdoing it. So they involve you allow your breath to sort of collapse into your hara, and then there's this moment where there's nothing going on, and then your hara, your diaphragm says, "Hey, you got to breathe in," and you allow it to happen, and so on. And I was sort of clinging to the pause at the bottom of the breath, and I discovered that while I was sitting period of zazen after a period of zazen, I discovered that that pause could go on almost forever, and it was really sort of marvelous, right? And in the process, I kind of made myself slightly anoxic, and I was also kind of starving myself at Orioki because I took on an additional practice of only eating the first scoop of food that landed in each of my bowls, and sometimes it was a pretty small amount of rice or something. And so I was starving and anoxic, and at one point, about 3 days in, it kicked me over into this essentially miniature psychotic break. Right, so it's really easy to get trapped by spiritual ambition, and everyone, let's be clear, does it, right? But the that doesn't mean that the effort that we make to be attentive, to have the attention be as broad as possible, to stay with the body, to stay with the breath, is wasted. That is actually the technique of shikantaza, right? When somebody says shikantaza, that's what they're talking about. It's always be sitting in that sense, right? The it's the good news about that is if you practice it over time, the effort required to be that way tails out to zero, because it just becomes a procedure that's part of your body and your mind, your mental makeup, and then it's kind of no effort at all, right? Does that make sense, or what do you think?
Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, but I mean, it's a really excellent question. It's the sectarian arguments that have plagued Buddhism as a result of exactly this question have been eternal and incredibly problematic. So we're not the first, basically. Anyway. Well, we might have time for one more quick question. Does anybody have one more question?
Matt, if you've got a question, we can address that and then probably move on to service.
Great.
First, thank you for coming out, Zachary, and helping. It's very much appreciated.
You're welcome.
Yeah, with regards to the previous question and what you were saying, just to add to that briefly, it is possible that a frustration builds with regards to that ambition. And the failure to make more rapid progress than you are. And that ambition and that failure can lead you to stop practicing. This has been a personal experience of my own. If knowing the fact that you're hearing this, please let it be an encouragement to you that it's not uncommon, because I know others who have suffered from that as well. And keep going. Yeah. Just keep suffering with it, because it will pass.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's exactly right. And I would be willing to hazard a guess that everyone that takes on Buddhist practice has this problem. It just really, it's just because of how we're built, right? If somebody holds up, I don't know, piece of candy, we lean in that direction, right? And it's the study of how we're built and the revelations and transformations that arise out of that study have to include this exact question, right? And the interesting thing is that over time, it becomes, you don't have to banish that. It just becomes a part of the work of everyday practice, right? There's no there's no end to the ways we can trick ourselves with ambition, but they can all be part of the field of continuous everyday practice. That's all.
Well,
Well,
thank you very much.
thank you so much. I really appreciate your attention and your questions, and it was wonderful being here.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Thank you.